Hello everyone. Welcome to the New Bedford Whaling Museum. Today I'd like to tell you about my favorite art glass from the museum's collection and about a special company that had its heyday from 1870 till the early 1900s. It was called the Mount Washington Glass Company. As a docent at the museum, when I would come in for my tours on Fridays, I generally leave the museum with more questions than when I came in. And the lovely glass objects in our Shapiro gallery raise some questions for me. What are those unusual glass designs? Why was it so popular among people who could afford it? And how's glass made anyway? And how does it figure into New Bedford's whaling history? Well, in the 1850s, there was a general movement that grew out of a reaction to the industrial age. Artists and designers wanted to focus on quality craftsmanship. They believed that art wasn't meant to send some sort of political or moral message, but to exist simply for its beauty. This was known as the aesthetic movement, and eventually along with that came the notion of paying closer attention to nature, to the world around us, and even to other countries and their cultures. And while most of these pieces that we're going to look at today might feel Victorian to us here in the 21st century, they do also pay close attention to the natural world around us. So let's take a look at some of this glass. Here is a vase done in the Burmese style. There was a lot of competition among art glass makers back in the 1870s and 80s. Each manufacturer gave exotic names to their items to lure buyers and fetch good prices. Some glass makers created dramatic color effects by using various chemicals. Burmese glass was meant to elicit a vision of a sunset in Burma, so it was called Burmese. And if you look at a Burmese sunset, you can see what's going on here. The color starts out with this deep coral and slowly changes to a creamy yellow. This effect was created by mixing uranium oxide and gold to produce the deep coral that shades to yellow. This style has an interesting history. Burmese glass was patented by Frederick Stacy Shirley, who was brought over from England to manage the company in the 1870s. So there was a special Chinese vase owned by Mrs. Sarah Rodman Morgan, the wife of Charles Morgan, who was a celebrated whale ship owner. This is the same family who launched the famous ship called the Charles Morgan, the only living whale ship in existence, and which is docked at Mystic Seaport in Connecticut. She wanted to raise money for charity, and so she brought this vase to auction in 1886, and it fetched the princely sum of $18,000. That would be about $325,000 in today's money. The whole incident set off quite a fad for this particular color glass. And so the Burmese style glass was made in imitation of the Morgan vase. The style also kind of reminds one of a ripe peach, but it is not to be confused with peach blow glass, which is similar but uses different chemicals to get the effect of a light pink at the top of the object to a sort of a bluish-white cast at the bottom. They replaced the uranium in the batch with a small amount of cobalt or copper oxide. And so what does President Grover Cleveland have to do with Mount Washington glass? Well, Cleveland was around 49 when he married the very young, beautiful 21-year-old Frances Folsom. Cleveland knew the Folsoms very well, and everyone was speculating that he would marry Frances's mother, who was a widow. And at that time, the newspapers wanted to sell good stories, and so the Clevelands were in the news all the time, especially young Frances. And so advertisers shamelessly placed her image in the middle of an advertisement with their products. It was not considered illegal at the time, and so they did it shamelessly. Anyway, Frederick Shirley cleverly presented President Grover Cleveland and Frances with some of the Burmese glass for their wedding present. And President Cleveland promptly sent back a lovely thank you note and Mount Washington Glass was often running, advertising the Cleveland connection to its glass. Shirley also sent some to Queen Victoria's daughter, Princess Beatrice. Queen Victoria loved the Burmese glass and promptly ordered a 50-piece tea set and some vases, all valued at about $450. And he promoted this by making copies of Queen Victoria's letter and marketing the glass. What makes Burmese and peach blow styles so lovely to me, anyway, is the special painting of flowers and the tiny beadwork that was done by very talented artisans who would have worked separately from the glass blowers and makers. Mount Washington Glass employed about 1,200 people in its heyday. It was a major industry in New Bedford, and it could be very dangerous work. Lead and uranium were used. Glass objects had to be smoothed out on steel belts, sending lots of glass dust into the air and into workers' lungs. However, by this time, right around the 1890s, New Bedford called itself, and justifiably so, the headquarters of art glassware in America. So, how was glass made? Glass is made from ordinary melted sand, but the sand needs to be melted at an extremely high temperature of just under 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit. You've probably seen demonstrations of glass being blown on the end of a pipe in order to make various shapes. This requires a furnace filled with melted sand or molten glass at the bottom. But the other way to make glass is to fill a mold. The mold will have a pre-made design etched into it. Then chunks of glass would be pressed into the mold and heated in a kiln. This could also be done with molten glass as well. It would be dropped into the mold and heated in a kiln until the glass softened and would flow downward to fill the mold. This is called pressed glass. Beside glass blown and the various other styles of glass called cut glass, there was a lot of pressed glass that was made, especially by the early glass companies. It was affordable and as close to mass production as you could get. They made lots of glass in this way: tumblers, dishes, candy dishes, and many kerosene lampshades. It was called the poor man's crystal. Getting back to the Mount Washington Glass Company, a man named Deming Jarvis was responsible for starting the company up in South Boston in 1837. Deming Jarvis was a very important player and was heavily involved during the early days of the Sandwich Glass Company on Cape Cod as well. The company had various owners and managers over the years. Deming Jarvis passed it on to his son. Then William Libby of Libby Glass fame got his start at Mount Washington Glass. By 1860, though, the physical plant up in Boston was in poor condition, and the owners at the time saw an opportunity in New Bedford. The New Bedford Glass Company had just built a new state-of-the-art building, but the glass company itself had failed, and it made sense for Mount Washington Glass to move in. However, around 1870, a group of investors turned the company into a corporation, and this is when they brought in Frederick Shirley to manage the operation. The investors were headed up by William Roach, famous household name in New Bedford because of the Roach family's long history as whale ship owners and candle makers. Shirley was a pretty talented man. His father owned a chandelier firm in London, and he understood glass. He was a designer, but also, as we've seen, a very good promoter of glass and a good businessman. The board of investors enlarged the company to include the production of chandeliers as well. This next piece of glass is Shirley's first patent. It's called lava glass. Sometimes it's known as Sicilian glass. This glass was inspired by ancient pottery and glass found in contemporary excavations in Pompeii in the 1860s. So Shirley included the chemical elements of volcanic lava in its ingredients. He also developed the process of fusing separate shards of glass in the body of the object, which gave the vessels the pretty shafts of color that you see. The next piece of glass I'd like to show you is an example of Vaseline glass. This glass is interesting. It has a small amount of uranium in it. I once visited a home in New Bedford that had a very large collection of Vaseline glass in specially lit cases on their dining room walls. When the lights were turned off, they would turn on these special ultraviolet lights in the cases, and the glass would glow neon green due to the presence of the uranium. They also had black flecked wallpaper printed with bats, and so the glass combined with this wallpaper made the whole thing look very unique. Fast forward to 1880, and we have a new artisan in town, also brought over from England, and his name was Thomas Pearpoint. Pearpoint was a fine silversmith, and the company developed this idea of producing silver mounts for the Mount Washington glass vessels. So the two companies partnered to develop this new product. Nowadays, most folks who make a habit of browsing in antique shops know the word Pearpoint as a lamp company that made what's known as the puffy shades, as well as reverse painted shades. They are very unique, still very collectible. If you go on to eBay or any other of the standard auction sites, you will see many Mount Washington glass samples, Pearpoint glass, and the lovely different kinds of Pearpoint shades. By 1894, the Mount Washington Glass Company was incorporated into Pearpoint Corporation, and Pearpoint operated until around 1957. If you would like to view more lovely glass work, please join us at the New Bedford Whaling Museum and visit the lovely Shapiro Gallery on the street floor.